A black father was treated like a criminal when picking up his son at school, but what he showed the police changed everything. Marcus Washington drummed his fingers on his steering wheel, stuck in the afternoon traffic. The digital clock on his dashboard read 2:47 p.m. He still had time before Jamal's pickup, but barely. His son's face flashed in his mind, that gap-toothed smile that could melt away any stress from a tough day in court. Come on, he muttered, inching forward as the traffic light changed. His phone buzzed with another message from his paralegal about tomorrow's case, but he ignored it. Wednesday afternoons were sacred. They belonged to Jamal. The radio hummed softly in the background, playing some old soul music that reminded him of his own father. The thought brought a mix of warmth and sadness. His dad had never missed a single pickup, not once in 12 years. Now, Marcus was determined to do the same for Jamal. He finally pulled into the parking lot of his law firm, Regional and Associates, where he'd left his briefcase with crucial documents for tomorrow's hearing. The security guard, Tom, gave him a friendly wave. "Cutting it close today, Mr. Washington," Tom called out with a grin. Marcus hurried past, adjusting his navy suit. "School pickup. Can't be late." Inside his office, his colleague Sarah was waiting with a concerned look. "Marcus, the Henderson case." "Not now," he said, grabbing his briefcase. "It's Wednesday." Sarah's expression softened. "Jamal Day. Got it. But the client?" "We'll have to wait until tomorrow," Marcus finished, already heading for the door. "You know the rule." Back in his car, Marcus checked his reflection in the rearview mirror. At 42, the gray starting to pepper his temples made him look distinguished, or so his mother kept saying. He straightened his red tie, Jamal's favorite, and pulled out of the parking lot. The familiar route to Riverside Elementary brought the usual mix of emotions: pride in his son's achievements at one of the city's best schools, gratitude for being able to provide this opportunity, and that constant, nagging awareness of being different in a sea of mostly white faces. His phone rang through the car's speakers. "Dad, you are still coming, right?" Jamal's voice was small, uncertain. Marcus's heart clenched. "Of course I am, buddy. When have I ever missed a Wednesday?" "Never," Jamal said, brightening. "Miss Thompson says I got an A on my science project." "That's my boy. We'll celebrate with ice cream after your karate class." "Promise?" "Promise. Now get back to class. I'll be there soon." The call ended, and Marcus found himself smiling. These moments, these simple, precious conversations, were what life was all about. Pulling into the school's visitor parking lot at 3:05 p.m., Marcus grabbed his briefcase and headed toward the main entrance. The afternoon sun was warm for October, and the trees lining the schoolyard were just starting to turn golden. Parents were already gathering, forming their usual small clusters. Marcus recognized most of them by now, though few ever spoke to him. There was Mrs. Peterson, who always wore tennis clothes and gossiped with her friend group. Mr. Roberts, checking his phone while his younger kids played on the small playground. Miss Chen, who at least offered a polite nod sometimes. As Marcus approached, he noticed the subtle shifts. Mrs. Peterson's group grew quieter, their conversation dropping to whispers. A father pulled his daughter closer as Marcus passed. These weren't new reactions. He'd seen them countless times before, but they still left a bitter taste in his mouth. He found his usual spot near the entrance, away from the main crowd but with a clear view of the doors. Setting his briefcase down, he checked his watch. 3:12 p.m., right on time. A young mother he didn't recognize was standing nearby, her eyes darting nervously in his direction. Marcus had learned to ignore such looks, but today she actually spoke. "Excuse me," she said, her voice tight. "Are you waiting for someone?" Marcus maintained his professional smile, the same one he used in court when facing hostile witnesses. "Yes, my son. He's in Mrs. Evans' third-grade class." "Oh," she looked surprised, then embarrassed. "I didn't know. I haven't seen you before." "I am here every Wednesday," Marcus said quietly. "Have been all year." Before she could respond, another mother approached them quickly. "Susan, come look at this text from the PTA," she said, shooting Marcus a suspicious glance as she pulled her friend away. Marcus sighed, checking his watch again. 3:14 p.m. Almost time. He thought about all the conversations he'd had with Jamal about moments like these. How to stay strong, how to hold your head high, how to be twice as good just to be treated half as well. The school bell rang, its sharp chime cutting through the afternoon air. Parents pressed closer to the entrance, eager to collect their children. Marcus stayed where he was, maintaining his small bubble of space. The doors burst open and children began streaming out. The usual chaos of backpacks, lunchboxes, and excited chatter filled the air. Marcus scanned the faces, looking for Jamal's bright smile. That's when he heard the sirens. At first, it was just a distant wail, but it grew louder quickly. Too quickly. Marcus felt his chest tighten as two police cruisers turned into the school entrance, lights flashing. Parents turned to look, conversations dying mid-sentence. Children stopped in their tracks, some pointing at the police cars. Marcus stood perfectly still, his legal training kicking in. Don't make sudden moves. Keep your hands visible. Stay calm. The cruisers pulled up to the curb, and 3 officers emerged. Marcus recognized their expressions immediately. He'd seen them in court countless times. They'd already decided guilt. They were just here to confirm it. "Sir," the lead officer called out, one hand resting on his weapon, "stay right where you are." The crowd parted like water, creating a clear path between Marcus and the officers. He could feel dozens of phones pointing in his direction, recording what was about to unfold. "We've received a report of a suspicious individual matching your description," the officer announced loudly. "What's your business here?" Marcus felt the familiar burn of humiliation rising in his throat. 15 years of practicing law, 3 years of picking up his son from this very spot, and still, here he was, guilty until proven innocent. He took a slow, deliberate breath, remembering his father's words. "Sometimes, son, dignity is all we have. Hold on to it." The school entrance had grown eerily quiet now, save for the murmur of parents' whispers and the click of phone cameras. Somewhere in that building, Jamal was probably making his way out, unaware that his father was about to become another viral video, another statistic, another story to tell. But Marcus Washington had spent his life fighting battles in courtrooms, and he knew this moment wasn't just about him anymore. It was about every black father who'd ever been looked at with suspicion for simply being there for their child. The weight of his briefcase felt heavy against his leg, containing the very proof that could end this confrontation. But right now, with 3 officers approaching him and dozens of witnesses watching, Marcus knew he had to handle this carefully. One wrong move, one angry word, and this could end very differently. He kept his voice steady, professional, the same tone he'd used in 100 trials. "Officers, I understand you are doing your job, but I am here for a very simple reason." "Hands where we can see them," the second officer interrupted, taking an aggressive step forward. Marcus slowly raised his hands, painfully aware of how this must look to all the parents who'd been watching him with suspicion all these months. In their minds, he knew, this scene was only confirming their worst prejudices. The afternoon sun felt suddenly hot on his face, his carefully pressed suit now a source of discomfort rather than professional pride. But he kept his composure, even as he heard Mrs. Peterson's stage whisper, "I always said there was something off about him." The lead officer moved closer, his hand still on his weapon. "We're going to need to see some identification." "Of course," Marcus replied calmly. "My ID is in my briefcase. May I reach for it?" The tension in the air was palpable as the officers exchanged glances. Children were being hurried away by their parents, but others stood transfixed by the scene unfolding before them. Marcus could hear snippets of their conversations. "Mommy, why are the police talking to that man?" "I told you he looked suspicious." "Should we call the principal?" Each word was a small cut, but Marcus maintained his composed exterior. He'd taught Jamal that education and dignity were his best weapons against prejudice. Now was the time to prove those weren't just empty words. The lead officer nodded tersely. Slowly, any sudden moves? I understand, Marcus said, his voice carrying across the now silent schoolyard. As he began to reach for his briefcase, he silently prayed that Jamal wouldn't come out just yet. His 8-year-old son shouldn't have to see his father like this. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. Just as Marcus's fingers touched his briefcase handle, a commotion erupted at the school entrance. His heart sank as he heard a familiar voice cut through the tension. Marcus? It was Mrs. Evans, Jamal's teacher, her face etched with concern. What's going on out here? Behind her, children were crowding at the doorway, wide-eyed and confused. Marcus could see Jamal trying to push through, and his stomach churned. Ma'am, please stay back, the third officer called out. This is a police matter. Mrs. Evans, a veteran teacher of 30 years, stepped forward instead. A police matter? This is one of my students' fathers. But her words were drowned out by the growing noise. More parents had arrived for pickup, creating a circle of spectators. Phones were raised higher, recording every moment. Marcus could already imagine the headlines. Black man confronted by police at elementary school. Sir, I am going to ask you one more time, the lead officer said, his voice harder now. What is your business here? Marcus kept his hands visible, his voice steady, despite the chaos around him. As I was trying to explain, I am here to pick up my son. I am his father, and I have documentation. Anyone can claim that, another officer cut in. We've had reports of suspicious activity. Suspicious activity? Mrs. Evans interjected, her voice sharp. The only suspicious activity I see is 3 officers harassing a parent who's been picking up his child every Wednesday since school started. The crowd's murmuring grew louder. Marcus could hear snippets of conversations, some defending him, others reinforcing their suspicions. But all he could think about was Jamal, and how this moment might affect him. Look, Marcus said, his professional demeanor never wavering. I understand you are responding to a call, but surely we can handle this without. That's when he heard it, the sound that would break his carefully maintained composure. Daddy? Jamal's voice, small and frightened, cut through the noise like a knife. The crowd parted, and there stood his son, Batman backpack clutched tightly to his chest, eyes wide with confusion and fear. Marcus felt his heart shatter. This was exactly what he'd tried to protect his son from. All those careful conversations about dignity, about rising above prejudice, about showing the world your best self, and now Jamal was watching his father being treated like a criminal. Stay back, kid, the second officer warned, but Jamal was already moving forward. Mrs. Evans tried to hold him back. Jamal, honey, wait! But Jamal pulled away from her grasp, his voice trembling. That's my dad. Why are you yelling at my dad? The officers tensed as Jamal moved closer, and Marcus felt a primal fear grip his heart. His son was just a child, unaware of how quickly situations like this could turn dangerous. Jamal, Marcus said, fighting to keep his voice calm. Stay with Mrs. Evans for a moment, buddy. Everything's okay. But it wasn't okay. Nothing about this was okay. And as Marcus stood there, hands still raised, watching his son's tears begin to fall, he knew this moment would change everything, not just for them, but for every father who'd ever been judged by the color of his skin rather than the content of his character. The familiar anger and humiliation rose in Marcus's throat, but 15 years as a corporate lawyer had taught him to keep his composure even in the face of blatant prejudice. Because right now, with his son watching, with the world watching through dozens of phone cameras, he had to be more than just a father or a lawyer. He had to be an example. Marcus's heart pounded in his chest as he watched Jamal's tears fall. The crowd had grown silent, the only sounds being the quiet sobs of his 8-year-old son and the hum of the police cruiser's idling engines. Sir, the lead officer said, his voice slightly less harsh now that a crying child was involved, we still need to verify your identity. Marcus nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving Jamal. Son, it's okay. Remember what we talked about being brave? Jamal wiped his nose with his sleeve, clutching his Batman backpack tighter. Like when you have to speak in front of the class? A sad smile crossed Marcus's face. Just like that. Now, I need to show these officers something in my briefcase. Can you be brave for me? Mrs. Evans had moved closer to Jamal, placing a protective hand on his shoulder. Officers, this is completely unnecessary. Mr. Washington is a regular parent here. Ma'am, the second officer interrupted. We're following protocol. There have been reports. Reports? A new voice cut through the tension. It was Mr. Thompson, the school janitor, who'd emerged from the building. Reports about what? The man who brings his son extra lunch when he forgets it? The one who helped me change my tire last month? More voices began to join in from the crowd. He helped set up the science fair last week. Didn't he donate those books to the library? I've seen him here every Wednesday. But there were other whispers too. Why doesn't he just show his ID? If he's innocent, he has nothing to worry about. Better safe than sorry these days. Marcus took a deep breath, remembering all the times he'd told Jamal how to handle moments of prejudice. Officers, I am going to reach for my briefcase now. Everything you need to see is inside. Slowly, the lead officer warned, though his stance had relaxed slightly. As Marcus bent down, he could hear Jamal's shaky voice. Mrs. Evans, why are they being mean to Daddy? He didn't do anything wrong. I know, sweetheart, Mrs. Evans replied softly. Sometimes people make mistakes. Marcus's hands trembled slightly as he reached for his briefcase. Not from fear. He'd faced worse in his career, but from the weight of the moment. He could feel dozens of eyes on him, phones still recording. This wasn't just about him anymore. Daddy, Jamal called out suddenly, show them your special picture, the one with the fancy black dress. A few confused murmurs rippled through the crowd. Marcus's fingers found the leather folder he was looking for, the one he'd started carrying specifically for moments like this, though he'd hoped he'd never need it. Here, he said calmly, slowly straightening up with the folder in his hands. May I? The lead officer nodded, stepping closer to inspect the content. Marcus opened the folder with practiced precision. He'd organized it carefully, custody papers on top, school registration forms, and then, Are you wearing judicial robes? The officer's voice cracked slightly. The crowd pressed closer, trying to see. Jamal, despite his tears, managed a small proud smile. That's when Daddy became a superhero judge. Mrs. Peterson, who'd been among the first to call the police, pushed forward. A judge? But you never said. Should I have? Marcus asked quietly, his voice carrying across the now silent schoolyard. Should I have to announce my credentials every time I pick up my own son? The second officer had lowered his hand from his weapon, his face flushing red. Judge Washington? From the Ninth Circuit Court? The same, Marcus confirmed, still maintaining his professional demeanor. Though today, I am just a father picking up his son, like I am every Wednesday, like I have been for the past 3 years. Jamal broke free from Mrs. Evans's grasp again, but this time the officers didn't stop him as he ran to his father. Marcus knelt down, finally able to embrace his son, briefcase and folder still in hand. I was scared, Daddy, Jamal whispered against his shoulder. I know, buddy, Marcus replied softly. I know. But remember what we always say? Jamal pulled back, wiping his eyes. We show them who we really are. The lead officer cleared his throat uncomfortably. Judge Washington, we had no idea. There was a call about a suspicious person. And what exactly, Mrs. Evans interrupted, her voice sharp, made Mr. Washington suspicious? His suit? His briefcase? Or perhaps something else? The implications hung heavy in the air. Parents who had been recording started lowering their phones, some looking ashamed, others confused, a few angry, though it wasn't clear at whom. Susan, the nervous mother from earlier, stepped forward. I was the one who called, she admitted, her voice small. I am new here. I didn't know. I just saw a man standing alone, watching the school, and I thought. Marcus stood slowly, keeping Jamal close. You thought you were protecting the children. He finished for her. I understand that instinct. But let me ask you something. Did you call about any of the other parents standing alone? Did you question their right to be here? Susan's face crumpled. I am so sorry. I never meant. I know what you meant, Marcus said quietly. And that's exactly the problem. The officers had moved back, conferring quietly among themselves. The lead officer finally stepped forward again. Judge Washington, we sincerely apologize for this misunderstanding. If T here is anything we can do. There is, Marcus interrupted, his voice firm but not unkind. He looked down at Jamal, who was still pressing close to his side. T, here is a lot we can do. But right now, my son and I have a karate class to get to, and I believe I promised him ice cream afterward. Jamal's face brightened slightly. Can I get 2 scoops? Since I was brave? For the first time since the police arrived, Marcus felt a genuine smile cross his face. 3 scoops, champion. You earned. As they began to walk away, Mrs. Evans called out, Mr. Washington, the school board meets next Thursday. I think they need to hear about this. Marcus nodded, but his focus was on his son. The crowd parted for them now, but differently than before. Not from fear or suspicion, but from something that looked like shame, respect, or maybe a mixture of both. Daddy? Jamal asked as they reached their car, his voice small but steady. Are you really okay? Marcus knelt down again, straightening his son's backpack straps. I am now, buddy. But you know what? You asking that question, that's what makes you special. You care about others, even when you are scared yourself. Like a superhero? Better than a superhero, Marcus said, helping him into the car. Like yourself. As they drove away, Marcus could see the police cars pulling out in his rearview mirror, the crowd of parents finally dispersing. His hands were steady on the steering wheel now, but his mind was racing. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Daddy? Jamal's voice came from the back seat. Can we get chocolate and vanilla swirl? Marcus smiled, pushing aside the weight of what had just happened, focusing on the present moment. Anything you want, champion. Anything you want. But as they headed toward the ice cream shop, Marcus knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges. The video would spread, phones would ring, questions would be asked. He'd have to explain to Jamal why some people saw them differently, why being brave sometimes meant staying calm in the face of injustice. For now, though, he focused on his son's excitement about ice cream, letting the love between them wash away the afternoon's pain. Because that's what fathers do. They carry the weight so their children can fly. Hey, Daddy, Jamal said suddenly. Do you think Miss Thompson saw you being brave today? Marcus caught his son's eye in the rearview mirror. I think she saw us both being brave, buddy, both of us. The sun was setting as they pulled into the ice cream shop's parking lot, casting long shadows across the pavement. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but right now, in this moment, they were just a father and son going for ice. And sometimes, Marcus thought as he watched Jamal bounce excitedly in his seat, that's all they needed to be. Inside the ice cream shop, the evening crowd was starting to trickle in. Jamal pressed his face against the glass display, his earlier tears forgotten in the face of dozens of colorful flavors. Look, Daddy, they have that blue one you said was too weird. Marcus laughed, the tension in his shoulders finally starting to ease. Bubblegum blast? Still too weird, buddy. The teenage girl behind the counter smiled at them. Would you like to try any sample? Before either could answer, the bell above the door chimed. Marcus turned to see Officer Chen, the lead officer from the school, stepping in. The easy atmosphere immediately tense. Judge Washington, Officer Chen said, removing his cap. May I have a moment? Jamal pressed closer to Marcus's leg, his earlier fear returning. Marcus placed a protective hand on his son's shoulder. We're kind of in the middle of something here, officer. Please. Chen's voice was softer now, almost pleading. 5 minutes, that's all I ask. Marcus looked down at Jamal, who was watching the exchange with wide eyes. Hey, champion, why don't you decide on your flavors? Remember, 3 scoops, any kind you want. The ice cream girl, sensing the tension, jumped in. Want to try our new rainbow sprinkle mix? It's extra colorful. While Jamal was distracted with samples, Marcus stepped aside with Officer Chen, keeping his son in his line of sight. I've been on the force for 15 years, Chen began, his voice low. I've made mistakes, but today was different. Different how? Marcus asked, watching as Jamal giggled at a taste of mint chocolate. I have kids too, 2 boys, and watching your son's face today. Chen paused, struggling with his words. I keep thinking about how my boys would feel, seeing me treated that way. Marcus turned to face him fully. And how many other fathers have you approached like that? Fathers who didn't have a judge's robe to protect them? Chen's face fell. I don't know, too many, probably. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a card. The department is starting a community outreach program. We need voices like yours, people who can help us do better. Before Marcus could respond, Jamal called out, Daddy, I picked my flavor. Just think about it, Chen said, placing the card on a nearby table before heading toward the door. He paused with his hand on the handle. For what it's worth, Judge Washington, I am truly sorry. As the door closed behind him, Jamal bounded over. Can I get chocolate fudge, vanilla bean, and strawberry, with extra sprinkles? Marcus smiled, pushing aside the heaviness in his chest. Extra sprinkles? I don't know. Please? I was super brave today. Yes, you were, Marcus said softly, pulling his son close. Yes, you were. As they sat at a small table, ice cream dripping and sprinkles everywhere, Jamal looked up with serious eyes. Daddy, those police officers, they were wrong about you. Marcus wiped a spot of chocolate from his son's cheek. They were wrong about both of us, but… Both of us? Yes. They were wrong to think I didn't belong there. And they were wrong to think you weren't brave enough to stand up for what's right. Jamal beamed, ice cream forgotten for a moment. Like when you stand up for people in court? Marcus glanced at Chen's card on the nearby table. Maybe there was a way to turn this day into something more than just another painful memory. Exactly like that, he said, watching his son attack his ice cream with renewed vigor. Sometimes being brave means standing up, and sometimes… Sometimes what, Dad? Marcus smiled, reaching for a napkin as ice cream dripped down Jamal's chin. Sometimes being brave means staying strong enough to help others learn to be. The sun had set completely now, casting the ice cream shop in warm artificial light. Through the window, Marcus could see people walking past, some glancing in curiously at the well-dressed black man and his son sharing an enormous ice cream sundae. Let them look, he thought. Let them see a father and son sharing a moment of joy, defying every stereotype and prejudice that had led to today's confrontation. Daddy? Jamal's voice pulled him back to the present. Can we come here every Wednesday? Marcus reached across the table, straightening his son's collar with gentle hands. Every Wednesday, champion. That's a promise. And as they finished their ice cream, planning next week's flavors and laughing about brain freeze, Marcus knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges. The video would spread. Questions would be asked. Decisions would need to be made. But for now, in this moment, they were just a father and son sharing ice cream on a Wednesday afternoon. And sometimes, that was the bravest thing of all. The morning after the incident, Marcus sat in his chambers at the courthouse, his fingers hovering over his keyboard. Dozens of unread emails blinked urgently on his screen, but his eyes were fixed on the viral video playing on his phone. Someone had titled it, Judge Racially Profiled at Son's School. Your Honor? His clerk, David, knocked softly before entering. The chief judge would like to see you. Marcus paused the video right at the moment he'd reached for his briefcase. Tell her I'll be there in 5 minutes. Also, sir, David hesitated. The press is gathering outside. They're requesting statements. Marcus straightened his robes, remembering yesterday's crumpled suit. No comments for now. Alone again, he reopened his briefcase, touching the leather folder that had changed everything. Inside, the photo of his swearing-in ceremony seemed to mock him. All that accomplishment, all that dignity, and his phone buzzed with a text from his sister. Mom's crying watching the video. Call. Another message popped up, this one from Mrs. Evans. School board emergency meeting called for tomorrow. Please come. The weight of yesterday pressed down on him. He thought about Jamal, who'd asked to sleep in his bed last night, something he hadn't done since he was sick. Daddy? He'd whispered in the dark. Are the police always going to be scared of us? The memory was interrupted by another knock. This time it was Judge Patricia Martinez, his mentor since law school. "Marcus," she said softly, closing the door behind her. "I saw the video." "Everyone's seen the video," he replied, turning off his phone. Patricia sat down across from him. "The chief judge wants to issue a statement condemning the police department's action." "Number." "Marcus." With all due respect, Patricia, he stood up, straightening papers that didn't need straightening. "Making this about my position on the bench misses the entire point." "The point being?" Marcus turned to face her. "That my credentials shouldn't matter. That having judge before my name shouldn't be the only thing that makes me worthy of basic respect." Patricia leaned forward. "Then use it. Use your position to make that very point." Before he could respond, his phone buzzed again. The school's number. With a sigh, he answered on speaker. "Judge Washington," Principal Harris's voice was carefully neutral. "I hope you understand we're conducting a full investigation into yesterday's incident." "An investigation?" Marcus's voice rose slightly. "Into what exactly? The fact that one of your parents called the police because a black man had the audacity to pick up his own child?" "Sir, we take these matters very seriously." "Do you?" Marcus interrupted. "Unusual for him. Because I've been picking up my son every Wednesday for 3 years, and not once has any staff member intervened when they saw parents pulling their children away from me. Not once has anyone addressed the whispers, the stares, the subtle discrimination that my 8-year-old has had to learn to navigate." The line was quiet for a moment. Then, "The police officers want to apologize formally. They've requested a meeting." Marcus caught Patricia's eye. She nodded encouragingly. "A meeting?" he echoed. "Like the one yesterday, where they had their hands on their weapons while my son watched?" "Please," Principal Harris's voice softened. "We need to handle this professionally." Marcus almost laughed. "Professionally? Is that what you call what happened yesterday?" He ended the call, turning back to the window. Below, he could see news vans pulling up to the courthouse. "You know," Patricia said quietly, 20 years ago, when I was nominated for the bench, someone called security because they didn't believe a Latina woman could be a judge." Marcus turned to face her. "What did you do?" "I did exactly what you did. I showed them my credentials. But then I did something more. I made sure it wouldn't happen to the next one." A soft knock interrupted them. David poked his head in again. "Sir, Officer Chen is here. He says he needs to speak with you." Marcus remembered the card from the ice cream shop, still sitting untouched on his desk. "Send him in." Officer Chen entered, this time in civilian clothes. His face showed signs of a sleepless night. "Judge Washington," he began, "I know no apology can erase what happened." "You are right," Marcus cut in. "It can't. But you are here anyway. Why?" Chen pulled out a folder similar to Marcus's own. "Because of this, these are incident reports, dozens of them. Cases where we responded to suspicious person calls that turned out to be parents of color just trying to be there for their kids." Marcus took the folder, his judicial demeanor slipping as he flipped through page after page of similar stories. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because you had proof. You had a way to show us our mistake immediately. But these parents," Chen's voice cracked. "They had nothing but their word, and we didn't listen." Patricia moved to the door. "I'll give you two a moment." After she left, Marcus sat down heavily in his chair. "Do you know what my son asked me last night?" Chen shook his head. "He asked if the police would always be scared of us." Marcus's voice was steady, but his hands gripped the armrest tightly. "What am I supposed to tell?" "Tell him," Chen said slowly, "that some of us are trying to learn, that some of us want to do better." Marcus looked down at the incident reports again. Each page represented a parent like him, but without the protection of a judge's robe. "You know," he said finally, "I almost didn't show you my credentials yesterday." "Why did you?" "Because my son was watching. Because I needed him to see that the truth still matters, that who we are still matters." Chen nodded slowly. "And who are you, Judge Washington? Beyond the robes, beyond the title?" Marcus stood up, walking to his desk where a photo of Jamal sat next to his law degree. "I am a father. just like every other parent at that school, just like every parent in these reports. He picked up the community outreach card Chen had given him yesterday. You said you want to do better. Prove it. How? Help me make sure the next father doesn't need a judge's robe to be treated with dignity. Marcus stared at his computer screen early the next morning, watching the view counter on the viral video climb past 2 million. The comments section was a battlefield of opinions, with some defending the police's actions while others called for systemic change. His phone hadn't stopped buzzing since dawn. Another call came in, this time from CNN. Still declining all interviews? David asked from the doorway. Marcus nodded, rubbing his tired eyes. How many so far? Today, NPR, Good Morning America, 3 local stations, and now CNN, plus about 50 emails from various news outlets. David paused, and here is something. What now? Your email. It's flooded with messages from other Black fathers. Hundreds of them. They're sharing their own story. Marcus opened his inbox, and the weight of all those unread messages hit him like a physical force. He clicked on one at random. Dear Judge Washington, yesterday, I watched the video of you at your son's school. I cried because last month, the same thing happened to me at my daughter's ballet recital. But I didn't have a judge's robe to protect me. Another message. Your Honor, thank you for standing your ground with such dignity. My sons are watching that video and finally seeing that they're not alone. And another. Judge Washington, I'm a father of 3 in Atlanta. Every school pickup, every soccer game, every parent-teacher conference, I carry my work ID, family photos, and my children's birth certificate. Just in case. Marcus's vision blurred as he scrolled through message after message. Each one carried the same pain, the same exhaustion, the same desperate hope for change. His office phone rang, the school board's number. Judge Washington speaking. Your Honor, Board President Richardson's voice was carefully measured. We've called an emergency meeting for this afternoon. We'd very much appreciate your presence. Marcus checked his calendar, already knowing he'd clear it if necessary. What time? 3 o'clock. We'll be discussing new security protocols and… Richardson paused. Well, here is something else. The parents have organized a gathering before the meeting. They're calling it a solidarity stand-in. A what? Apparently, Mrs. Evans started it. Parents are planning to stand outside the school at pickup time, holding signs supporting you and Jamal. Marcus fell silent, remembering how those same parents had watched yesterday, many recording instead of speaking up. Judge Washington, are you there? I'll be at the meeting, he said finally. But first, I need to pick up my son. Sir, given the circumstances, perhaps it would be better if… I'll be picking up my son, Marcus repeated firmly. Every Wednesday. That's not going to change. After hanging up, he opened his desk drawer and pulled out Officer Chen's card from the community outreach program. Next to it lay the folder of incident reports, stories of other fathers, other families, other moments of dignity stripped away. His mother's words from yesterday echoed in his mind. Baby, you've got a platform now. What are you going to build? A text from Jamal's phone lit up his screen. Dad, everyone at school is talking about the video. Some kids said you are famous now. Are you coming today? Marcus typed back quickly. Wouldn't miss it for the world, champion. Another email notification popped up, this one from the police commissioner, requesting a formal meeting. Marcus marked it as unread, just like the interview request. They all wanted to talk about yesterday, but his mind was already on tomorrow. David, he called out, get me everything you can find on police department community oversight committees, and contact Officer Chen. Tell him I want to see those training protocols he mentioned. Right away, sir. David paused at the door. Oh, and your sister's here. She brought Jamal's favorite cookie. Marcus's sister Lisa strode in, carrying a Tupperware container and wearing her Black Lives Matter t-shirt under her doctor's coat. Little brother, she said, setting down the cookies. You look terrible. Thanks. Marcus smiled weakly. Shouldn't you be at the hospital? Took the day off. Someone needs to make sure you don't spend all day brooding in your chambers. She perched on his desk, scanning the emails on his screen. Have you read any of them? Some, he gestured to his inbox. There are so many stories, Lisa. So many fathers. I know. she said softly. That's why you can't just hide in here. That's not what Dad would have done. The mention of their father made Marcus's chest tight. Dad never had to deal with anything like this. No, Lisa agreed. He had to deal with worse. And he still showed up every single day, teaching us to hold our heads high. She picked up one of the many newspapers scattered across his desk, all featuring the same story. Look at this. They're calling you the judge who stood his ground. But that's not what you did, is it? Marcus shook his head. I showed them my credentials. I proved I belonged there. Exactly. Lisa's voice was fierce now. You showed them that their assumptions were wrong. And now you have a chance to show them something even more important. What's that? That change is possible. That it has to be possible. She stood up, straightening her coat. Now, are you ready to pick up your son? Marcus checked his watch. 2:45 p.m. The solidarity stand is exactly where you need to be, Lisa finished. Both of you. As they walked through the courthouse, people stopped to watch. Some offered encouraging nods. Others quickly looked away. Marcus kept his head high, just like his father had taught. In the parking lot, Lisa hugged him tight. Mom's already at the school. She said, and I quote, "Nobody's going to make my grandson feel unwelcome at his own school." Marcus laughed despite himself. She's not planning to give another one of her speeches, is she? Oh, baby brother. Lisa grinned. You know, Mom. She's probably got 3 prepared. As he drove toward Riverside Elementary, Marcus's phone kept buzzing with notifications. But for the first time since yesterday, he felt something beyond the anger and hurt. He felt purpose. The school came into view, and his breath caught. The sidewalks were packed with people, parents, teachers, community members. Many held signs. Black fathers matter. Our children are watching. Change starts here. And there, right in front, was his mother, holding Jamal's hand. His son's face lit up as Marcus's car approached, and he broke free from his grandmother's grasp, running to meet his father. The crowd parted, not like yesterday, not from fear or suspicion, but with respect, with understanding, with the beginning of change. Because sometimes, Marcus thought as he embraced his son, the most powerful thing you can do is simply show up day after day, proving by your presence that you belong. Ready for the board meeting, champion? He asked Jamal. His son nodded solemnly. Ready, Daddy. Are you going to help make things better? Marcus looked at the gathered crowd, at his mother's proud face, at Officer Chen standing quietly at the back, at Mrs. Evans organizing parents, at all the phones recording this moment, not of confrontation, but of transformation. Yeah, buddy, he said softly, we're going to try. Because in the end, that's what justice was about. Not just wearing the robe, but using it to lift others up. Not just standing your ground, but building something better on it. Together, father and son walked toward the school board meeting, ready to turn yesterday's pain into tomorrow's promise. Chapter 4 continued. Inside the school board meeting room, the atmosphere was tense. The usual polished wooden tables and formal nameplates seemed at odds with the raw emotion filling the space. Parents, teachers, and community members packed the room, many still holding their signs from outside. Principal Harris cleared his throat. Judge Washington, would you like to address the board first? Marcus stood, straightening his tie. Jamal sat between Gloria and Lisa, clutching his grandmother's hand. Before Marcus could speak, a voice called out from the back. Wait, it was Susan, the mother who'd called the police. She made her way to the front, her face streaked with tears. Please, I need to say something first. The board members exchanged glances, but Marcus nodded. Go ahead. I've spent all night watching that video. Susan's voice shook. Watching myself become the villain in my own story. I kept telling myself I was protecting the children, but she turned to face the crowd. I was only protecting my own prejudices. Murmurs rippled through the room. Susan continued, now speaking directly to Jamal. Young man, I made your father feel like he didn't belong at your school. I made you watch him be treated like a criminal. Here is no apology big enough for that, but I am going to try anyway. Jamal looked up at his grandmother, who nodded encouragingly. He stood up, his small voice surprisingly steady. My daddy says that saying sorry is good, but showing sorry is better. The room fell silent. Susan wiped her eyes. You are right. That's why I've asked to join the school's diversity committee, and I want to help create new policies, so this never happens to another family. Marcus watched his son's face carefully, seeing the same quiet strength he'd tried to instill in him. Principal Harris stepped forward. Judge Washington, the floor is yours. Marcus pulled out Chen's folder of incident reports. Before I address my own experience, I want to read something. He opened to a marked page. This is from last month. A father was reported as suspicious while watching his daughter's soccer practice. He was a pediatric surgeon, coming straight from saving a child's life. He turned the page. 2 weeks ago, another father was handcuffed in front of his twins during a school carnival. He was a military veteran who'd served 3 tours. The room was completely still now. Marcus continued. These reports go on and on. Fathers whose only crime was showing up for their children. The difference is, they didn't have a judge's robe to protect them. Mrs. Evans stood up. We've started drafting new protocols for parent verification and security concerns. Every parent will be treated with the same respect, regardless of... Regardless of what? Marcus interrupted gently. Go ahead, say it, regardless of race. Because that's what happened here, isn't it? We need to name it to change. Officer Chen, who'd been standing quietly by the door, stepped forward. The police department is implementing new training procedures. But more importantly, we're creating a community oversight committee. Judge Washington, we'd like you to Marcus looked at his mother, seeing the pride in her eyes. Then at Lisa, who gave him a subtle nod. Finally, at Jamal, who was watching everything with those wise eyes that seemed too old for his 8 years. I'll chair the committee on one condition, Marcus said. Every parent who's experienced something similar gets a seat at the table. Not just the ones with titles and credentials, but every single one. The board president leaned forward. That could be quite a large committee. Good, Marcus replied firmly, because this is a large problem. Suddenly, Jamal's hand shot up like he was in class. Principal Harris couldn't help but smile. Yes, Jamal? Can kids be on the committee too? Because we see stuff too, you know. A warm chuckle rippled through the room, breaking some of the tension. Marcus felt a surge of pride. Actually, he said, that's an excellent idea, because ultimately, this is about our children's future. The meeting continued for hours, with parents sharing stories, teachers proposing changes, and community members offering support. But what struck Marcus most was how Jamal stayed engaged, taking it all in, occasionally whispering questions to his grandmother. As the meeting finally wound down, Susan approached them again, this time with her own son in tow. Jamal, she said softly, Tommy has something he'd like to say. The boy, about Jamal's age, shuffled his feet nervously. I am sorry my mom called the police on your dad. And would you maybe want to come to my birthday party on Saturday? The adults held their breath, watching this small moment of potential healing. Jamal looked up at his father, who gave him a slight nod. Only if my dad can come too, Jamal said firmly. Tommy broke into a smile. Of course, he can help with the magic show. As the 2 boys chatted about party plans, Marcus felt his mother's hand on his shoulder. You see, she whispered, this is how change happens, not just in boardrooms and committees, but in birthday parties and playgrounds. Marcus watched his son, already teaching Tommy their secret handshake, and felt a glimmer of hope. Because sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest moments. A father picking up his son, a child standing up for what's right, and a community learning to see with new eyes. The work wasn't done. The committee meetings would be challenging, the changes wouldn't come easily, and there would still be days when Marcus felt the weight of other people's prejudices. But watching Jamal now, laughing and planning magic tricks with his new friend, he knew they were moving in the right direction. Because in the end, this wasn't just about proving who he was, it was about proving who they could all become.